President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the postponement of the 2023 population and housing census, earlier scheduled next month from the 3rd to the 7th, a date that will now be determined by the incoming administration will be announced by the administration. The president gave the approval after meeting with some members of the Federal Executive Council and the chairman of the National Population Commission, Nasser Isakwara, and his team at the presidential villa. A statement signed by the government reads, quote, "In arriving at the decision to postpone the census, the meeting reiterated the critical need for the conduct of a population and housing census 17 years after the last census to collect up-to-date data that would drive the developmental goals of the country and improve the living standards of the Nigerian people," end of quote.
In the meantime, the Labour Party's presidential candidate in the last election, Peter Obi, has commended President Muhammadu Buhari for postponing the national census. President Buhari had approved the postponement of the 2023 national population and housing census, earlier scheduled for the 3rd of May and the 7th, due to several issues bedeviling the proposed exercise. While reacting in a tweet, Obi said the postponement is a welcome development.
Joining us to discuss this development is Chima, a public policy analyst who has done a lot of work in the area of census. And from our roadside studio is Opatola Victor, the lawyer who actually sued the National Population Commission demanding the postponement of the census just before the government announced the shift. Thank you for joining us on Newsnight.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start from our live studio here. $1.8 billion gone. Where has all that money gone?
Well, it has not necessarily gone down the drain.
Okay.
A significant proportion of it has been spent,
Okay.
and then the resources they are spent on are still here. For instance, they've said they have acquired PDAs, they've said they acquired geospatial devices, they've said they acquired a whole lot of things. And if you look into the contracting and whether it was open, whether it was inflated, that's a different kettle of fish. But I think that those devices are supposedly going to be there in the new announced dates of the exercise.
Right.
Okay.
Well, let's come to you, Mr. Victor, in our offside studio. Well, you're seeing the fact that you had actually called for this. You had even sued the government. So now that this postponement has been announced, going the way of what you had requested for, what are your reactions really, especially looking at the fact that the government says, you know what, it wants the new administration really to carry out this exercise?
It's actually a welcome development. It's a good thing that the federal government has decided to postpone this census, because the lack of the fact that the NPC, National Population Commission, was not well prepared was very, very obvious. So it's a good thing that the federal government is deciding to postpone this census. And in regards to the fact that they've made some contract and they spent some money, the suit that we filed in court is actually of two, there are actually two different suits. The first one was actually in regards to a letter, an application written to the commission demanding a breakdown and certain information from the commission. For instance, the budget, the amount that they've received so far, and the technologies they wanted to deploy. So these are some of the informations we required from the commission, and which the commission refused, to accede to this request. So we are in court, praying for an order of mandamus to compel the commission to release this information, which I believe will show probity in regards to the fund that has been dispensed so far by the federal government.
Okay, so we're still with you. We also need to know what you think about the preparedness, because you spoke about the preparedness of the National Population Commission. Well, they were perhaps not quite ready before the federal government came up with the idea of the census. So how are you sure, what should we expect from the incoming administration as regards their priority list? who knows? Is this on their priority list at all? What would you think, or what would you advise?
Census, first of all, it's very important that this country conduct a census. You know, what we are praying for is that this census should be conducted diligently and effectively, so that we'll not end up wasting scarce resources. Census all over the world is a form of affirmative action, especially for the minority ethnic groups in this country. So it is important that we conduct it effectively and ensure that individuals are effectively counted in this country.
Okay, so Chima, let me bring the conversation to you right now. The truth is, when it comes to census in Nigeria, it's always been controversial. Even if you cast your mind back to as far back as the 1952, 1953 census, remember that the southern politicians had accused the British administrators of actually, increasing the number in the north, really. So I ask you directly, why is it that the issue of census in Nigeria is always so controversial? Because even before this postponement was announced, we know the controversies, that this had stirred up in the public space.
Well, the issues around the census is that the ecosystem is set up for failure. And before now, there were 6 identified issues. We said that these issues must be laid out and addressed before Nigerians can have a credible exercise. I'll come back to the history that you talked about, but let's lay out those 6 issues. One, we said that the systems and the processes are unaudited, and that we can't walk into a major national exercise again with unaudited systems and processes. NPC is claiming that they've acquired geospatial devices, that this is going to be a digitized census, and we are welcoming all of those claims. What we're saying is that those systems and processes must be subjected to integrity tests and audit for us to determine both the systems, their porousness to external threats and also internal compromise before we can rely on those systems. The second one is that we query the organizational capacity of the NPC, and my brother Victor had alluded to that. When you talk about the appointment, even Isakwara, that is now the chairman of the organization, how was he appointed? He was appointed, there was someone that was appointed, and then his name was withdrawn, and then Ikwara was appointed. And then if you go back to the troubles we had with NPC, with INEC, you saw that a lot of things had to be around deployment of sensitive staff. So when you go into organizational capacity of the NPC, we'll see a whole lot of issues that we say that those things must be strengthened and so visibly done before we can believe that the census can be credible. And then we talked about the political pressure, which is what you're talking about now. Because Nigeria's resources, at least as of today, 30% of Nigeria's resources are predicated on census numbers. So that has given political actors the motivation to inflate census numbers, especially at local government levels and at the state levels. So you've seen all of those things happening before, and as of today, the next census is susceptible. Even with the postponement, it is still susceptible to those political pressures. And then we are talking about IDPs. As of today, there are people in Benue State, in Borno State, and in fact in a whole lot of other regions in Nigeria that are internally displaced. Not only are these people internally displaced, but some people have taken over their communities and are living there and have put up houses there. The NPC is going to count and enrich those people in lands that doesn't belong to theirs, which means that the people in IDP camp may be condemned to a life of permanency in IDP camp. So there are issues around the census that we said, yes, we have achieved the first feat, which is the postponement, but there are 6 other areas that must be addressed before we get a credible exercise.
Okay, well said. Let's get back to you, Victor. The very first census to be conducted in independent Nigeria was done in 1962 under the leadership of the then Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. But we didn't quite have the backbone or the structure, shall we say, of something like the GPS and satellite imagery to carve out geo-referenced enumeration areas until 2006. How can we improve on our use of technology in conducting census?
Now, the effectiveness of census is not actually new science. Census has been conducted effectively in various parts of the world. So if we conduct ours effectively, it's not as if we are doing anything groundbreaking. Now, what are those things that can be deployed to ensure effective census? We must harmonize our data gathering. The data in which we have gathered so far in various parastatals of government must also aid in whatever census we are working on. Another very important aspect, which is important, is the way and manner with which we register our death yes, those that have died, death and birth within this country. All these things will help to ensure we have an effective census. Now, most importantly, during this aborted census, there was this fundamental part of it that the MPC decided to do away with, which is the thumb printing, the biometric part. I believe vehemently that if the biometric part is used and ensured, it will ensure that one, there is no double it will ensure the effectiveness of the process. It will ensure the trust with which people will impose in the system. And it will also ensure that the figures that will derive from the process is one that will be verified, is one that, if there's any objection later on in the future, can actually be juxtaposed against the existing database that we have in this country. For instance, the Road Safety Corps is an effective organization that has been using biometric system over the years. They have a system of people who have driver's license within this country. So if the census is deploying a biometric system, anybody who is caught within the census or counted within the census, the data can be juxtaposed with the data that is currently in the government database, which will ensure that we are able to verify whatever count that the census comes up with.
Interesting. Well, Chima, you've listened to Victor there, and let's bring the conversation back to you. You talked about technology, and of course, this was one thing that a lot of Nigerians got excited about, the fact that we're going to spend as much as we plan to, close to $1 trillion, really, yes, with support from our international partners. But at the end of the day, I still want to go back to the past before we move to the future. Even in 2006, the last census we conducted 17 years ago, there was still that issue of traditional counting that was used. And according to you right now, even the technology that the MPC is planning to use, you believe is not effective enough. Talk to us about how we can go past all of the controversies that we know that comes from the process of carrying out a census, and even when the results are out. How can we deal with this, irrespective of what administration carries out the census?
Well, our organization is impaneling. There are 4 documents you have to look at. You have to look at the 1999 Constitution, specifically Section 213 of the 1999 Constitution. There are specific proposals we are making to the National Assembly that will come at the inauguration of the next session of the National Assembly. Then you look at the 2004 NPC Act. That's the laws governing the census. You have to look at that. Then look at the 2019 National Population. I think I've forgotten the name of that document, but it's a 2019 document. And then also look at the internal guidelines of the NPC itself. If you look at those 4 documents, you will see why Nigeria census is always problematic. One, the census, a whole lot of issues around the constitutional backing of the census. But moving away from that, you talk about technology. What we are doing in Nigeria is a major national experimentation, just like INEC did. When you have a system or processes, or you bought systems up, you don't just move from the laboratory to the markets. You have to do a series of tests. One of the key things that sabotaged what we did on February 25th is the reported delay of issuance of, I think, passwords to INEC field offices. That shows you that as little as internal compromise can compromise the entire system. So if you're designing a system in any environment, you're not assuming that angels are going to use the system. In this case, NPC will be leaving those systems in the hands of enumerators, in the hands of their own equivalent of rack techs, in the hands of several layers of checks and balances, and these individuals have varying degrees of autonomy over the systems. And if you leave porous systems in the hands of people who could use the systems the way they want to, whether they are induced or maybe coerced, then those systems could be tampered with. That's why we're saying that integrity tests must be done, and we'll see reports of the integrity tests. And then there are areas we have to strengthen our laws for those to happen. Then we also have to look at, for instance, why do we have to keep sharing Nigeria's resources based on numbers, right? Because of that, there is this motivation by political actors to inflate political numbers at their political end for political purposes. One, for revenue sharing purposes, and then 2, for purposes of keeping down the nation in terms of block votes. That's why. So if Nigeria really wants to have a credible census, it's easy to have, like my brother Victor says. But the thing is that there has been this myth about certain population in Nigeria, that if you conduct a credible census, that credible census will impugn, or at least will prick that balloon of mythical numbers we keep banding in Nigeria. But that's why key political actors would rather die than allow for a credible census. However, I trust in the ability of Nigerian citizens to continue to raise their voices, to empanel ideas, and to police the NPC, police the government to hold a credible census.
Absolutely. The politics of census and, of course, the numbers that eventually come out. We need to get it right, is what our two analysts tonight have said. Chima Christian, a public affairs analyst, as well as Opatola Victor, a legal practitioner. Gentlemen, thank you for analysis tonight.